So today I was able to talk with Charlie Roumeliotis. You guys probably already all know him. We were able to go through some roster projections, some mock lines, and a lot of other Blackhawks talk. So thank you again to Charlie for taking time to talk with me, and let's get into it. All right, Charlie, thank you for taking time to talk Blackhawks with me. Really appreciate you being on. Just to warm up, I guess I'll go through some of the offseason stuff, ask you a couple questions on that, but I know that's already been talked about a lot. So obviously Anton Frondell ends up being the pick. I want to ask you about more specifically him, the recent news that he'll be playing the SHL next year. Just what are your thoughts on how that can impact his development and him spending another year in
Yeah.
Sweden?
Yeah. First off, great to be with you. I'm
Yeah,
glad
thank you.
we're able to reconnect in this
Mm,
summer and big fan of the content that you provide for Blackhawks fans. So
thank you.
kudos to you. Yeah, when it comes to Frondell, I actually really like the decision that he is leaning towards playing in the Swedish Hockey League for the entire season. And I'm a big proponent of not rushing prospects to the NHL
Mm,
just to get some excitement going. Like I think there's something to be said about developing away from the spotlight. I know last year with the Blackhawks when they drafted Artem Levshunov, they wanted to get him over to the professional league so they can work with him more one-on-one and get him acclimated to the NHL style of game, 82 games
yeah.
plus playoff, just get physically and mentally ready for that. I wouldn't have minded seeing him go back to college just to kind of develop away from the spotlight and just kind of be a kid. But I
Mm,
saw both sides of it. And so, the Hawks made that decision. But with Anton Frondell, because he didn't play in the Swedish Hockey League last year on a full-time basis, I think there's still another step that he can get to before he can graduate to the higher league of whether it's the AHL first and then the NHL
yeah.
or just jumping straight into the NHL. And Marcus Kruger plays on that Swedish
Hmm.
team that Frondell is going to play on, and so he's going to have a really good mentor there in
Yeah.
Sweden. And so I am very in favor of Frondell playing in Sweden this coming season over making that transition to the pros right away.
Yeah. I'm with you. And I think it'll be interesting to see since he played wing all last year, if he moves into center or plays wing. I know it might be a little early. That's just my only other Frondell question, but as of right now, where do you see him potentially slotting in long term with the Blackhawks on the wing or at center?
I think the Blackhawks, I imagine they drafted him expecting him to be a center because
Mm,
I don't know if you want to draft someone that high and wanting for him to be a wing long term. Like I think ideally, and the way that you heard the Blackhawks talk about him is he plays a game that
yeah.
translates well into May and
Hmm.
June. That means they look and you hear Frondell talk about how he likes to model his game after Alexander Barkov.
Hmm.
Like that's a center, right? And so
Yeah.
I think the Blackhawks, while they are on record saying they envision Bedard and Frank Nazar as their top two centers,
Yeah.
I do think one of them is going to get pushed to the wing, most likely Nazar.
Yeah.
And I think Frondell is probably going to be the ideal second line center, Bedard the first line center, and
Hmm.
then Nazar is going to be one of those guys that you can plug anywhere. Where if you have an injury to the top six, he can slide into that second line center role and fit in seamlessly. So I do envision Frondell long term as a center with the Blackhawks.
Yeah. I think I do think Nazar ends up on the wing long term, even if it's not this year. I think him with Frondell would be a really fun line there. So then Backlab, Nestor, Mason West. I won't ask you about them because if you didn't know, Mason West also plays football. But is there anything else you want to add about the draft, especially like it's going to stay decentralized, which is kind of surprising. I know you weren't really a big fan of that. Do you have any thoughts? Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I was actually surprised that it got voted to be decentralized again because it felt like all the reports going into the NHL draft was this was likely going to be a one and done. And then
Yeah.
they vote on it a couple weeks later and it stays the same. So I'm a big fan of the centralized location of the draft where all the general managers are under the same roof. It's an event
Hmm.
for hockey. It's such a unique it's so unique. And like the NHL is never really going to compete with the NFL and NBA when it comes to TV
Yeah.
ratings. And so I think having all of the NHL personnel in one location is super beneficial for the local city that's hosting financially specifically, but also just it's just an amazing event. Having said that, I do think teams very much enjoyed having the privacy of being in their own war rooms and being able to talk freely about players and potential trade options. And so I see both sides. As a fan and a media perspective, I love when we're all there. But if I'm running a hockey team, I probably would be voting to keep it decentralized because it just allows for more free conversations. And these are like massively important decisions too. Like you're talking about
Yeah.
players that are, going to be cornerstones and you could potentially make a franchise altering trade or whatever. So these are long-term ramifications too. So I see both sides of it.
Then we go to free agency, which was pretty quiet. I think a lot of people understand why it was quiet. So there really isn't anything too much to ask you about. I will say the one guy I wouldn't have minded the Blackhawks signing was Jonathan Duran, who signed a 2-year deal. Um, that was something I had pointed out before. That was like, all right, I wouldn't have minded them make that move, but I think everyone understands why they wouldn't make any moves. Is there anything from free agency you have?
Yeah, it was I was a little surprised to see um some of the backlash that the
Yeah,
Blackhawks had gotten for their quiet free agent uh period because I don't know about you. I wasn't really expecting them to do very much.
yeah,
Just because it was honestly maybe the weakest class in like a decade plus. That's how rough it was.
yeah,
And Mitch Marner, it sounded like he was angling to go to Vegas like
yeah,
during the
full
middle
time.
of last season. So that
Yeah,
was never really a realistic possibility. The one guy I had thrown out there that would potentially fit for Chicago long term was Nikolai Ehlers, but he had after I had made those comments, I think he had like publicly or maybe his inner circles had put out there that he's willing to take less money to go to a
contender.
contender.
Yeah,
And so Chicago doesn't check that box right now. And so then you're going down the list and it would have been really hard for the Blackhawks to convince themselves to just let's just go irresponsibly throw
yeah,
out money just to say we made a splash. And I get it. Like fans, it's been a long how long has it been? 8 years since the Hawks have made the playoffs, if we're kind of excluding that bubble year. It, and so the fans want to see winning hockey again, right? But I think the Hawks can do far more harm than good by trying to speed this up than if they took their patient approach to make sure that they were seeing how a lot of these young guys are developing, making sure that they're not spending money long term, and then they figure out, oh wow, we actually have a stud in Frank Nazar and Sam Rinzel and Levshunov, and it's like, how are we going to pay them all?
yeah,
We don't, we gave this person a 7-year contract or whatever it is, and so I think the Hawks are trying to identify who their core pieces are. And then they're going to try to fill in like, okay, who can be the Marian Hossa type signing that could like
yeah.
get us over the edge or that can be Bedard's line mate long term. And so I understand the frustration because it's like you just want to start seeing progress but I don't think the Hawks should um, be going out and making moves irresponsibly just to appease the short-term fan base because they want to, so it's definitely
Yeah.
a delicate balance because I understand the frustration of wanting to get this thing moving along, but I've always said being more patient is better than being, on the other side.
I will say I think most of the fan base realizes why. Like I think it's only a small percentage of people that were upset, and I think those are the ones that kind of voice their opinion. So I think that's why it might seem like more people are upset. I think a lot of people understand. And yeah, coming in the two guys I had said were Mikael Granlund, who ended up getting a big contract, and then Duran, like I said, I think could have potentially been a signing, but I'm not too upset about it. Yeah, I need a sip of water. I'm just gonna edit this part out.
Yeah, go for it. I was gonna say with some of the guys that are like on the fringe, like Granlund and Druin, I think they would have been good like stopgap options, but I think that's why the Hawks
Yeah,
went out and got Burakovsky
Burkowski.
and, because they do want to keep spots open for guys like Oliver Moore or Ryan Greene or, Landon Slager to
Yeah. And I
nail down
think
full-time roles. Yeah.
even though they didn't like sign anyone technically, I mean, they brought back Ryan Donato and added Burakovsky. So they still
Right.
did make, I mean, if those were on the open market, that'd be probably decent. That'd be pretty decent signings compared to who else
Yeah.
was
And
available. So,
bringing back Sam Lafferty too.
and Lafferty, yeah, that could be a good option. So I do want to look ahead next season now. I have a lot of mostly roster projection questions and then some line projections. So we know like all the talk's been like the young guys handing the keys to the young guys. I think that's going to be most apparent on the back end with probably what it looks like 5 young guys on the opening night roster on the back end. I do want to ask you about a couple guys on the forward group because I'm not sure how much younger that's going to be on opening night. Um, so I'll start with probably the most borderline guy right now, which is Colton Dach in terms of the young guys. Just where you see him starting and what you think he might be heading into camp.
Yeah, I think with Colton, I've always called him maybe like the X factor of the Blackhawks' forward pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
at least going into this season, because there were a lot of undersized, skilled forwards that the Blackhawks have in the pipeline with Bedard and Nazar and
Yeah,
Oliver Moore, right? But Colton Dach brings a different element where he's bigger,
he's
he's
a
a power
beast.
forward.
Yeah,
Yeah, he goes to the net, goes to the dirty areas, and you're like, okay, he could be a potential piece. But the question with him has always been the consistency, both in his game and his ability to stay on the ice, because he does have some injury history.
yeah,
And I remember, I think it was not this past year, but the year before, I remember talking to Anders Sorensen when he was the Rockford head coach, and he was like, he was easily the best player during like a 1 to 2 month stretch. And I think he had gotten hurt. It was like in December or whatever, and then it took a while for him to get back to that level. And so he was definitely shining as as maybe the best forward that Rockford had. And so I'm wondering how that is going to translate to the NHL level full time. And I think this is going to be a pretty big year for him to prove himself on whether he can be a piece of the puzzle
yeah,
on the next great Blackhawks team, or if he's going to be one of those guys that's, you see the flashes, but you don't see the consistency from it, similar to a guy like Lucas Reichel. Obviously, different players stylistically, but there's always like, they always leave you wanting more. And
yeah.
the encouraging part about Doc is I remember when they first called him up, gosh, his first game with the Hawks this coming season was incredible. Didn't he have like 3 hits in like the first shift or something? It was,
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
had like 6 hits in the game. He had
yeah.
so many reverse hits throughout this year too. That was the
Yeah.
only guy on this team that I've seen do have any reverse hits really outside of Connor Murphy. But yeah,
Yeah. So I like what Doc brings to the table,
Mhm.
but I think the jury is still out on whether he can live up to the consistency part of it and be a guy that you can depend on a nightly basis.
I do also want to ask. I mean, Oliver Moore, I think will start in the AHL. I want to ask more about Ryan Greene because that was someone I feel like hasn't been talked about too much. I thought he was like outstanding in his debut in that big Montreal game. I want to ask about where he stands heading into camp and like your thoughts on him.
Yeah, with Oliver Moore, I definitely think him starting the season in Rockford and
Hmm.
honestly probably playing a majority of the season in Rockford
Yeah,
would not be a bad idea. I know it's going to be tempting to want to call him up or make him be on the opening night roster from day one, just because he had that stretch
yeah,
last season. But there were definitely
he
areas
looked
where
raw. Yeah.
yeah, he's raw talent. And even in college, his sophomore year, like I don't think he lit it up where he was
Hmm.
enough where it's like, oh, okay, this guy is definitely ready for the next level.
Yeah.
So I do think that there should be some minor league time for Oliver Moore. With Ryan Greene, it's a little bit of a different story because he ended up going back to college for a junior year. And so he's already a year ahead in the development curve. And the more the more important the games got in college for Ryan Greene down the stretch, the better he performed. So he performed like I think if you look at like his final 12 or so games and then what he did in the playoffs, he was excellent for his team. And so that has to be an encouraging sign where like the deeper they got, the better he performed.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he hit a wall and he was he wasn't shining in those important games. And so with Greene, I could be convinced that he could start the season with the Blackhawks. But if Chicago goes into the year with Bedard as the first line center, Nazar as the second line, and then Jason Dickinson as the third, I'm not sure I would want Ryan Greene to start the year
Yeah.
as like the fourth line center. Like I'd rather he go to
Hmm.
Rockford, play top 6 minutes, develop into an all around centerman, and then when he gets called up at some point down the road, he's ready to step in to handle some top 9 minutes. And so that's what I'll say on him. But I guess I wouldn't be surprised either way if he's on the opening night roster or not,
Hmm.
because it really depends on what role the Blackhawks want to slot him in.
Yeah, he looked ready. I'd agree, but um, there's plenty of forwards that could get minutes to start the year. So I don't know if they're gonna have room. The two more guys before we do like some mock lines. I want to ask. I think the most interesting players to watch will be Levshunov and Korchinski, and where they will start. Um, I just want to ask where you see who you see potentially starting in the NHL and where.
Yeah, I think with Artem Levshunov, I think he's going to be a full-time NHL player this
Hmm.
season. And it felt like he performed better in the
Yeah,
NHL than he did the AHL. And we were actually talking about this with Dana Gray that we had on our podcast. And it feels like his game just translates better in the NHL because it's just more structure in when you get to the NHL versus the AHL can be a little bit less structured. It's a little bit more scrambly and less predictable. Whereas in the NHL, you know that you're getting paired with a legit NHL defenseman partner. It's NHL head coaching structure. It's all that. And so I think Levshunov showed enough during his stints in the NHL last season that he could handle
yeah,
a full 82 game season. So I think he's going to be a full-time NHL player. With Kevin Korchinski, it's interesting because when Levshunov was in the NHL, it feels like Korchinski
yeah,
performed very well in Rockford because he stepped into the Levshunov role,
yeah.
right? He was the guy getting all around minutes, quarterback in the first power play, just being the guy. And so I think that part is encouraging. Having said that, when you think of Rinzel and Levshunov and the minutes that they're likely going to play for Chicago this year, I don't know how Korchinski fits into that if he's not getting the 20 plus minutes that he's accustomed to getting, where, maybe I know he's more offensive minded, but
Hmm.
he was developing in Rockford as more of like the number one guy when Levshunov was in the NHL. And so that part's going to be tricky. I tend to think that Korchinski will probably start the year in Rockford and then get called up at some point during the season just to kind of see where his development is at. But I think with Levshunov, he's likely going to start um, the year with the Blackhawks and be a full-time NHL player.
All right, I do want to do some lines quickly before Zoom cuts us off.
Let's have you go through the lines that you have, and I'll like poke holes through it or whatever
Okay.
because I haven't actually sat down to project the lines because I
Yeah,
still feel like there's just some question marks for me. Like, is Lucas Reichel going to be on the opening night roster? Like, or
yeah.
is he going to get
There's been a
moved?
lot
So
of rumors that I've seen lately about Rinzel. Like, I didn't think anything was going to happen in the dead part of the offseason, but there's been a lot of talk about him. I do have him in my lines, and then I've got all like the borderline guys I mentioned just starting in the AHL. I think Colton Dach's probably the most likely to potentially start up, and I wouldn't mind if he was in the NHL. But I'll start with my first line. I have Teuvo Teravainen with Bedard and Mikheyev on my first line. Then I've got my to round out the top six, Donato with Nazar at center and Burakovsky on the wing. Then I have now my bottom six is gonna have to be like a hear me out. I may need to explain myself a bit, but I have Landon Slaggert on the third line with Lucas Reichel at center and Sam Lafferty on the wing, and then Foligno, Dickinson, Bertuzzi on the fourth line.
okay. So here's what I'll say. Let's start with the first line. I think Connor Bedard needs to play with Teuvo Teravainen as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible this year. The Hawks didn't go out and get him a consistent line mate, which again, I'm not criticizing at all because there were just not many options out there to go get Connor Bedard a
Yeah.
long-term line mate. So I think if you want to put Connor in the best position to succeed, Bedard and Teravainen have to play together for a majority of the season. And they did so the first half of the year, but then the second half, it was not very much. And so I would keep that duo together. the the wing on that is probably going to could be a revolving door.
Fluctuate. Yeah.
Donato, Mikheyev, Burakovsky. I could see all three of those guys playing, and then
Hmm.
whoever isn't playing in that role, I think are going to be the wingers with Frank Nazar.
Yeah.
Interesting though that you have. Did you say Sam Lafferty centering the third line, or was that
I have
Reichel?
Lafferty. I mean, you could throw him at center. I have him on the wing with Reichel at center. I
Okay.
believe.
I think I would probably put Dickinson third line center and then flip
Okay.
flop. Reichel probably starting on the fourth line if, assuming he's on the roster.
Yeah.
And I could see like, Reichel, Lafferty. Uh, I don't know. Like I could see Slaggert playing on the third line too, and you have Foligno on the fourth line. I think that would be ideal.
Yeah. I want like the speed with the speed, and then the slower guys like Dickinson and Bertuzzi kind of pair together. So I think you could flip flop them either way. That was just kind of my thought process there. Um, yeah, I just don't know where like Bertuzzi really fits in, because it feels like he's just gonna like slow down every line. If you have Bedard, Nazar, Reichel as your top nine centers, maybe it's Dickinson on the third line, then you play him there. But I just don't know exactly where he's gonna fit in this year. My back end then, I've Vlasic with Rinzel. I think Kaiser and Levshunov is a pair that I would really like to see this year, and then really whoever else with Murphy on that third pair, whoever makes out of camp. Um,
Yeah. Where do you have Shea Weber?
yeah, I got him. Yeah, no, that's funny.
um, man, the Vlasic Rinzel pairing has the potential to be an
Yeah,
extremely exciting pairing to watch all season
yeah.
long, where they're logging like 24 plus minutes a night. Levshunov too. I think Kaiser would probably be the front runner, yeah, to play with him, and so
Hmm.
that's a very young top four. But it's an exciting one. And then yeah, Connor Murphy will probably slide into the third pairing role, and that'll be Huh. I mean, I know Louis Crevier will be there, but then that's two right-handed shots. So I think that
Probably
that
like,
can sort itself out. But I
yeah.
think the top four is important of like, Vlasic, Rinzel, Kaiser, Levshunov.
I'm super excited for Rinzel. I think he could be like a dark horse Calder candidate, um,
Oh,
depending on
you
how it goes.
I plan on writing a bold predictions art story leading into training camp, and I think one of my bold predictions is going to be that Sam Rinzel wins the Calder Trophy,
Yeah, I
not
think
just is
I
a
could totally.
finalist.
I feel like it. I was thinking about it. I think it could be like a kind of a Brock Faber, kind of a Bedard race, just reverse for the Blackhawks with Rinzel and maybe Ivan Demidov. Um, I think honestly Rinzel has a good shot, especially if he gets that top pair of minutes. And I mean, he could have scored probably 3 or 4 goals last year in the 9 games he played. He had a ton of chances, so I'm super excited for him this year.
Yeah, and I don't think there are any like I know Matthew Schaefer will be with the New York Islanders, but he missed so much of last season that it's like there's still going to be a growing period for
Yeah.
him. So I
Hmm.
don't know if he's going to be able to step in right away and just be
Yeah.
like a bona fide guy, whereas Rinzel is like 3 years ahead of him in the developmental
Hmm.
curve and got that taste in the NHL last year and just
Yeah.
handled it seamlessly. Yeah, Rinzel is going to be very exciting to watch next year.
I think the last thing I'll talk about here is how likely is it that you think this team could take a jump in the standings? I feel like it's going to be kind of similar but a little more fun to watch, or maybe some guys like do better than expected, like especially like with the young guys in the back end, a full year of Spencer Knight. I could see a scenario where they do take a jump in the standings and they're just ahead of schedule almost.
Yeah, so the Blackhawks finished with 61 points last season. And I think one of the Vegas odds makers released their over under point total for the Blackhawks going into this season, I think last week, and they set it at 67 and a half.
Mm,
So that's a 6 point increase, which is
yeah,
probably not as high as fans are hoping.
yeah.
But I think that's probably a realistic over under. Here's where I'll say if I had to provide some optimism on why they could hit the over on that is they're going to get a new coach bump in Jeff
Hmm.
Blashill. And typically when that happens, we even saw it with Luke Richardson when he first got hired by Chicago. They played so hard for him that first year. And even though the wins and losses weren't there, they were competitive in every single game. And so I think that is likely going to be the case with under Blashill in his first year is maybe they're going to be hovering in the 60-point range again, low 70s, but he's going to have them playing structured and playing competitive hockey that they might be able to get more games into overtime this year where
Yeah.
they pick up a loser point or whatever. And then you look at the end of the season and you're like, okay, Hawks put together, a 72. So I'm actually looking at the standings. So the Philadelphia Flyers had 76 points last year, which was tied for fourth worst. So if the Hawks make a 15-point increase to 75, that would still be third worst in the
Yeah.
NHL.
Yeah.
So they have such a long way to go in the
Hmm.
standings. But so even if they do see a fairly significant point increase, they're likely still going to finish in the bottom five of the NHL.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be more fun to watch. I could see a scenario where they play a lot better, but we'll see what happens. So yeah, that's all the questions I have for you, Charlie. Thank you for spending time and talking with me. I'm excited for this year.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. Great to do this with you, and I'm looking forward to doing it again down the road together.